So, The Last of Us Part 2 releases this week, and I probably don't need to tell all of you the drama that has surrounded this game over the past couple months. People are very concerned about this title due to various leaks and the way Naughty Dog and Sony has handled them, and the reviews that have started to drop have some very conflicting opinions that are further stoking the flames. Many of the big gaming sites seem to just absolutely love the game, giving it a lot of 10 out of 10s, saying like it's the best game of this entire generation, with some more independent reviewers telling a bit of a different tale. Now, I myself plan to play the game when it comes out and give my thoughts about it, but I just finished replaying through the original and wanted to give my thoughts on that game to give people an idea of where I'm at heading into this game, as well as sort of serve as a reminder to myself if I thought the original was really as good as so many say it is. To start off, I want to note that this is a stunning game. I did play through the PS4 remastered version, but this wasn't a huge overhaul really in terms of the visuals between the PS3 and the PS4 version. They mostly just did minor touch-ups and got the game running at a higher resolution and frame rate due to the more powerful system. There was actually an incredibly short turnaround time between the original PS3 release and this PS4 remaster. But yeah, the decrepit buildings of the apocalypse being overtaken by the beauty of Mother Nature is such a sight to behold, and it amplifies the game's themes of hope versus despair, and little details in the set dressing provide extra insight in just how brutal of a world you're dealing with here. The character models also were some of the best of the last generation, doing a fantastic job of conveying emotion, which also aided greatly in driving the narrative. Gameplay-wise, this is a third-person stealth shooter. It has some more survival-y elements like collecting resources for crafting and no regenerating health, but the focus is on sneaking around enemies and brutally killing them to get through different areas. The stealth in combat feels okay, in my opinion. Nothing particularly outstanding that you won't see in other games or that it really does better than other games, but it works well enough. Some of the melee kills, I will say, are pretty badass. There's a real visceral quality into the melee and hand-to-hand combat, but things do get a bit bogged down by the game's weak AI and just lack of enemy variety. The AI, it's just not smart. Your companion characters, for one, just love running around aimlessly, and it can be very immersion-breaking because, to balance things out, the game just has enemy characters not detect your companions when you're like sneaking around in that. You'll see them running right in front of enemies who just pay them no mind, and the enemies themselves are just incredibly predictable and have some weird issues themselves, like sometimes you'll be in the middle of a big fight and out of nowhere they'll just break aggro and like run away from you. Some weird stuff going on with the AI. So most of the enemy encounters aren't very interesting. Now when you throw something into these situations like the clickers, a fantastic enemy type, then things get interesting. These are essentially more feral, blind infected, but they react off sound, so if they hear you, they will come barreling towards you, and if they grab you, this is the most important aspect, it is an instant kill. When clickers come into play, it makes all enemy encounters more intense. While sneaking around, you don't want to accidentally step on a piece of glass or something to be met with the screeching howl of the clickers, followed up by them flailing towards you. And while fighting off, say, a group of infected, you need to try and take out the clickers first because, again, you can't have them grab you as it's an instant kill. Yeah, they're a fun, interesting enemy to fight against. The problem is, there really isn't much else in terms of enemy variety in this game to shake things up. You get these fat guys that pull chunks of their body off and throw them at you, creating these spore bombs a bit later on in the game. But that's pretty much it, and there are very few of those enemy types. There's also nothing in terms of boss enemies or anything either, so I think gameplay is fine, but it suffers from a lack of interesting things to fight against, as well as interesting situations, and I actually think the things they do to break up this standard gameplay loop are even weaker. There's a fair amount of what I would call exposition hallways, where you have a group of characters walking. Your movement is always hindered heavily in these types of sequences. Feels like you're crawling to wherever you're going, because we have to make sure it takes you long enough to get from A to B that the characters can get through their whole dialogue exchange. This stuff is a huge turnoff for me. There's so many better ways to give me some story. Like if you do this, have some interesting things for me to look at, a beautiful open area or a lively one, not just some dilapidated hallway. Given we're talking about the developers of Uncharted, I'm surprised they didn't have more set pieces to break up the standard gameplay. There were a few in the game. The opening actually did a phenomenal job of setting up what's happening and have the player act as just kind of an observer. But this is another thing the game definitely could have used more of to replace the boring walk-around moments as well as the puzzles. Another way they break up tense moments is with environmental puzzles, which, let's talk about this game's so-called puzzles. The characters regularly find themselves faced with obstacles that hinder their progression, and they have to find a way to get across an open gap or something. The problem here is these are some of the most tedious, brain-dead puzzles I've ever seen in any game. They pretty much always just revolve around finding a ladder or a dumpster that's conveniently hanging around and putting it down or positioning it so you can climb up that wall or across that gap. There are also times where you have to find a wooden platform to carry Ellie across a waterway since she can't swim, which, thank God, literally every time there's a big patch of water, one of these big, pier parts just happens to be sitting somewhere in the depths. Like I said, there's absolutely no brain work required in these instances. As soon as you've done one of these tasks, grabbing the ladder and putting it down one time, you've done it all the times. It's pretty much exactly the same every time. And worse yet, they sometimes drag them out a bit, having you use a ladder, right, to climb up a wall, and then you got to pick the ladder up and bring it 3 feet over to then climb down another wall and then pick it up again and use it to cross a gap. It's enough. Okay, I get it. These segments seem intended to just pad out the game's runtime, which is still on the shorter end. It'll take you about 15 hours to play through The Last of Us. But this is an instance where I feel the game is actually saved by its relatively short length, because while I may find many aspects lacking or mediocre, it's all pulled together and elevated on the shoulders solely of an incredibly gripping narrative that follows some of the most lovable and relatable video game characters of all time. Let's talk about the story. The game follows two protagonists, Ellie and Joel. Ellie is perhaps the last hope for humanity, as she has been bitten by one of the infected and not turned. So perhaps she holds the key to finding a cure for this plague. And Joel has been tasked with getting her to the Fireflies, a group that has the medical resources to discover said cure. A task he accepts begrudgingly. He's the pessimist, doesn't even seem interested really at first in potentially saving the entire world, and definitely isn't thrilled about dealing with this extra baggage. And as you can see coming from a mile away, the pair begin to bond throughout their adventure as they not only experience things together, but also learn more about each other's pasts, the hardships, the loss they've both gone through, and they become like father and daughter by the game's end. Which there's nothing particularly great about that arc in itself, but it's about the way it's executed. The tough love Joel gives Ellie as they grow closer. In many ways, he seems harder on her as he becomes more attached, perhaps to try and convince himself that she's not growing on him, but more so, I think, it's to prepare her to survive in this world. This is a place where bad people obviously do bad things, but good people oftentimes also have to do bad things if they want to survive. And all will be looking to take advantage of your humanity if it can help them get ahead.
Please!
Holy shit.
Help!
Are we gonna help him?
Put your seatbelt on, Ellie.
Well, what about the guy?
He ain't even hurt.
Ellie serves as an amazing case study of what the loss of innocence would look like in this type of world, as she frequently discovers all these things, we take for granted that she's literally never experienced in her entire lifetime. Things like going to the movies, chasing down an ice cream truck, hell, even playing video games. There's no time for any of that. We're too busy surviving. But in Ellie's evolution from a foul-mouthed burden for Joel to a foul-mouthed badass survivor, almost to the point where she's his equal by the end, her nature as a kid, her curiosity, her more positive outlook brings moments of levity where it feels like, hey, maybe one day things will be okay. Maybe this whole cure thing will work out. She helps restore a lot of the humanity Joel has clearly lost as a result of surviving in this world. She gives him something to actually live for. So you have this theme of survival versus actual living. Like, yes, Joel knows how to survive in this world, but is it even worth surviving in if you don't have something to live for? And this is something you see amplified in other characters you meet throughout the game. Some have become really good at surviving, but as a result have lost a lot of their hope, have lost a lot of their humanity, while others still cling to it. Either way though, this world has drastically changed the type of people they are. And this back and forth of, hope versus despair, struggling to survive versus having something to live for, persists all the way up to the game's insane final moments. I don't want to spoil the ending, as people may be looking to go back and play this game before they play the sequel, but it was pretty controversial when the game originally came out, and honestly, I think it's a perfect ending. Again, given the themes of the game, the way everything comes to a head may surprise you, may leave you wishing you can see what happens next, but I think it was just the way it should be. The way the game ends is actually why I, from the get-go, didn't want a sequel to this game, or felt that a sequel could happen in this world, but it should revolve around different characters. I think the story of Ellie and Joel was done perfectly, and I find it hard to see how they're going to improve on it going forward. So yeah, the game overall I think is very good. I wouldn't call it one of my favorites or anything. There's a lot of weak aspects in it gameplay-wise, but I think the story is just so top tier, and the game overall is tight enough that players just can't wait and see what happens next. And by the time people see the cracks in the gameplay, the weaker, more tedious aspects, the game's over. This is a prime example of why giving a game an appropriate runtime is incredibly important, and a higher amount of hours isn't always better. I think if they tried to drag this game out for like 20 plus hours, it would have suffered tremendously. Sometimes less is more. And as we head towards the sequel, I think if The Last of Us 2 can give us a narrative as strong as the original, while improving significantly on the gameplay aspects, then maybe it will be as good as some reviewers say. No matter what, we'll all find out soon enough. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on the original Last of Us, as well as Part 2, as we head towards its release in the comments. What did you think of the first game, and what do you want to see out of the sequel? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of the original Last of Us. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on Twitter, @JohnnyZakari, and join my Discord, ChiGuy and Friends. Link to both in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.